Alright everybody, welcome back to another video. In this one we're going to be looking at roof plan, but not just how to make a roof plan. Well, actually we're not going to be looking at how to make a roof plan at all. We're going to be looking at how we would create the roof design for various different types of roofing complexities. So we are all familiar, hopefully, at this point, how you would make a roof plan. If it's a symmetrical roof, you would have your ridge in the middle here, and then you have your hip rafters. By the way, you should also learn what these are. I assume you know what these are. You have your hip rafters, and then in the side here we have like the common rafters which run from the ridge to the fascia board, and then we have the hip jack rafters which run from the hip to the fascia board, and so on, right? So this is a symmetrical roof. It's a rectangle, pretty straightforward. But what if the roof had, or the building had a turn in it, right? How then would you approach it? Now, in this example, we see that this side of the building it's 5750, and this side of the building is 5750, which means that this length, the length of this wall right here, 4500, and then the length of this wall right here is also 4500. So they are the same, which means that when you run your hip at whatever angle, going up this way and this way, at whatever pitch, whatever angle, they are going to both meet at the same height. The ridge is going to start at the same height for this side of the house, this roof, and for this side of the house. So therefore, if these two ridges meet at, well, these two hip meet at this point where the ridge starts, let's say it meets at, that's for example 10 feet, then this ridge is going to be at 10 feet high, and then this other one over here, just because the two walls are the same, this ridge is also going to be 10 feet high, and therefore the two ridges would meet at that point right here. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Once the two sides are the same, then the ridge is going to meet at the same height. But what if we had a building with this shape, but this side is not the same? This is 3000 feet, and this side over here is 4500. Then what is going to happen? What do you think is going to happen? I'm hoping you're thinking along the same lines. They are not the same length, which means that when this hip line runs up, this at whatever angle you choose, and this hip line this hip rafter runs up at the same angle as this side, they are going to meet at two different heights. This one has a shorter distance to travel before the both hip rafters meet at the top. This one have a longer distance to travel because this side is longer before the two hip rafters meet at the top. Therefore, these two hip rafters are going to meet at a higher distance, a higher height than the two hip rafters over here. And you know where the two hips meet, that's where the ridge is going to be. Okay, so in that case, what do you do? So that is what we're going to be looking at, how to deal with roofs where of irregular shapes such as this, all right. And we can go on and on with the complexities of roofs, because not most houses, when you draw them, they're probably not going to be a rectangle or a square. They're going to have, these little turns here and there. So to help with the explanation, I'm going to look at some roofs here. So as I was just explaining, if we look at this roof right here, then we're going to notice that this side over here is much longer than this side over here, right? Right in the middle here, that's our ridge. Right here, that's another ridge. Right here, that's another ridge. So Notice that because I said this side is longer than this side, this hip rafter that's running up here and this one over here, they're going to be traveling for a longer distance before they intersect with each other, before they meet each other, which means they're going to meet at a higher point than, let's say, this side down here. This side down here, they move from here to here and here to here, and they would meet if they are at the same pitch, if the roof are using the same angle, then they're good. This is going to meet much faster and at a lower distance than where these two hip rafters meet. So let's look at the roof from another angle. Let's look at it from the front, and maybe that will kind of help us understand a little bit better. So let's look at it. Notice we have this hip rafter here, sorry, this ridge right here, and we have this ridge over here. Notice if we look at it from the front, we could clearly see that this ridge is lower, slightly lower, right? It is slightly lower than this ridge over here. This one is a little higher. Notice it's higher than where this one is, right? And that is simply because this side of the building is longer than this side. All right, so that's a simple explanation. You could even see it in these other drawings even better. So right, notice that this side is really short, so that means where these two hip rafters run up, right, they are going to meet very quickly, and that's where the ridge is going to be, at that height. Okay, but so we notice it meets right here. It doesn't go all the way up to here. Okay, but if we look at the other side, or if we look at this side, notice this side is much longer than this one. So that means this ridge is going to be much higher than this one. I think that's pretty straightforward now, if you get the idea. That's the concept. Okay, so let's go back to our drawings. So we're going to do this. This is going to be our building line. And then we're going to do just the roof outline. Okay, to see where the ridge and the hip rafters are going to run. So let me just join all these together so that I can offset to get my overhang. So I'm going to start with the overhang, 2 feet. I know it's kind of big, but we're going to use that. So that's our overhang. Now let me switch this to my roof outline layer. Here we have the building line, and we have the roof outline for the overhang. Alright, so what we want to do, this is the key, one of the key concepts in order to do these irregular, non-symmetric type of building roof designs. We want to treat each section of each shape as its own building and start building the roof like that. Okay, that's one way, one easy way I think of it. So for example, let me just explode these. All right, for example, I want to treat this like its own building. See, this entire thing, it won't come all the way down. We want to treat this as its own rectangle right here. And as we know, it should be fairly easy, just like here, to create a roof with the ridge in the middle and the hip rafters from each corner of the rectangle. Very simple. So we're going to treat this as its own roof right here in the middle. So if this is my wall, this is my wall here, this is my overhang, this is my wall here, this is my overhang. So I need to extend my overhang all the way out. Okay, so now I have my overhang here, 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 and here. That corresponds with each side of my wall. Okay, so we're just going to draw our rafters. Make sure they are coming in at a 45-degree angle. So I have my thing set to 45 here. I'm coming in at 45 degrees, Just gonna draw them along, and then I could always trim them off after. So that guideline is helping me there. I'll bring this in like so, and then bring this in like so. Alright, and where these, I'll just trim these off. Now where these hip rafters intersect each other, where they meet each other, that's where my ridge is going to go, right across like there. Okay, so I treated this false rectangle as my roof like that. Okay, now secondly, we want to do this side. So I'm going to bring this up 45 degrees. This is not the pitch I'm talking about. These lines are drawn at 45 degrees coming in, but the pitch of the roof, you could decide that the angle between the rafter and the wall, that's your pitch. Alright, so where these two hip rafters meet, that's where my ridge is going to go. I'm going to draw a line. Now if you notice, remember what I said, the ridge for this side is never going to be the same height as the ridge from this side. This is this ridge, this is going to be higher than it is over here, just like it is for this example. Let's see if I have one here. I don't have okay, I don't have a similar one. Alright, so this ridge is not going to be the same height, it's going to be lower because obviously this side is shorter than this side. So if I draw a line coming in here, that means this ridge is going to meet the hip. I'm just going to cross it and trim it off after. So this ridge meets the hip line that's coming down here. And all we have to do is just get rid of this side of the hip. Let's get rid of the excess. So it's as if you have this ridge board, and then we have this hip rafter coming down, and when it meets the ridge, this other section of the building, this other shape, it is going to stop right there and come across. That's our ridge. Okay, so all we need to do now is just put in our valley rafter right there, and notice it meets at the same point where this hip meets the ridge. The valley, hip, ridge all meet up at that point. And let me just turn off the wall layer so you could better see what we're talking about. Let me just trim these out. Alright, so here we have the roof is going to be sloping this way. Alright, I'm drawing an arrow there. This side is going to be sloping that way. This side is going to be sloping this way. And this side is going to be sloping that way. And here slopes this way. So water will run down the roof that direction, and water will run down this side that direction. Alright, so there you have it. That's, let me just let me just make all of these the same line type scale. It looks like all hidden lines. And then now I could just turn back on my wall layer, and I'm going to, trim up back these parts that I extended. So there you have it. Now that's still a pretty simple roof. It's just one turn. But what about this? We have a piece sticking out here. We have a piece sticking out here. How do we deal with this? Same thing. Alright. So let me just join these so I can offset it. Offset 600 millimeters. That's going to be 2 feet. And let me just switch this to my roof outline layer. So now what do we do? Again, let me just explode these back now. So what do we do? I'm going to treat this piece in here as its own roof. This rectangle in here is its own roof. Okay, and then I will deal with the smaller parts that are sticking out. So again, just for the sake of making it easier to visualize, I'm going to extend this line out so that I could have that side of the roof. This side of the roof, I'm going to extend this to here just to close it up, just for the sake of closing it up. And remember, I have for this side of this wall, I have my overhang right next to it, right? For this wall, I have my overhang right next to it. So if this wall is extended past here, then I should also have my overhang extended across there. So I have my overhang for this wall. So same thing up here. I have my overhang for this wall right here, and I have my overhang for this wall. I need to extend it right out there. This is important because when you're going to draw the hip line, it needs to start at the corner, and you need this line to be extended out there so you could draw it at the corner. Alright, so let's go. Let's treat this piece as the main part of our roof, as its own rectangle. So from this corner, 45 degrees, we're going in. This corner, 45 degrees, we're going in. This corner, pretty straightforward, right? We're just doing a plain old hip roof right in the middle where they intersect. That's where I'm going to draw that, and then trim away these lines like so. Alright, so there we have our hip roof for this piece. So what about these pieces now? Alright, well, as we learned, this part is very short, right? It is much shorter than this part, for example, which means that the point at which the hip rafters meet, if we're using the same pitch, if we're using the same angle, the point at which the hip rafters meet is going to be much lower. It's going to be lower than the point at which these two hip rafters meet. They're going to be higher than these over here, because this side is longer than this side right here. Okay, as we saw in our earlier illustration. So we already have that piece, so I'm just gonna trim out the parts that we extended. All right, like so. We don't need them anymore, I don't think. So this is running down here, but it's not going to be stuck in here, right? We'll fix that just now. So what we need to do now is draw our line. Well, I need to trim out this piece also, like so. We're back to how we were, but we have our hip and ridges in place. So now let's do this side. 45-degree lines where they intersect. That's where your ridge is going to be. Now, where does the ridge stop? We know that this ridge cannot meet this other ridge right here, because this ridge is at a lower point than the ridge, than this ridge. So I'm not going to carry this one all the way up here. I'm just going to leave it here for now. I'll show you exactly where it stops. We get that from the valley rafters or the hip rafters. Well, in this case, the valley rafters. So if I draw a line right here from this valley rafter, right this corner, 45 degrees going up, and I do another one from here, 45 degrees, then right where they meet, that's where the ridge is going to stop. Okay, that's pretty similar. Pretty similar to the, I think I lost the drawing there that we had. Alright, so that's pretty similar to the example that we had earlier. So this ridge is much lower, so it's not going to go all the way to that ridge. It stops right where these valley rafters meet the ridge up there. That's where it stops. So let's go to the other side. We do this same thing, 45 degrees, 45 degrees. Gonna trim this off, trim that off. Now remember we said where these two hip rafters meet, that's where our ridge is going to go, and this ridge is going to come forward until it hits this hip rafter. And once it hits the hip rafter, we are going to just get rid of the excess on this side, right? So it comes as if we have this ridge, and then we have this hip rafter coming down from the ridge, and then it meets this ridge for the second part, the second portion. So it stops right there. It doesn't continue on. Okay, so that's why we know to trim off this side. If you think of it that way, the highest ridge coming down meets the other ridge, and it stops, and it this ridge comes across right there. All right. So the only thing we have left to do is just put in this valley rafter right here. All right, because wherever the building turns, you're always gonna have a valley, like right there. On this side, these are hips, right? Hip right here, it turns this way. This causes a valley. This causes a valley, and this is the hip. Hip. All right, so there we have another. So I'm just gonna turn off the wall layer so I could make this all hidden lines by changing the line type scale, and I could turn back on the wall layer. All right, so that's another one. So let's look at a fairly more complex one, because a lot of houses these days have these twists and turns all over the place. Now these examples are if I'm just using all hip roof, right, and all sections. So how would I approach this one? Same thing. So let me merge these so that I can offset 2 feet. By the way, the offset could be whatever. I'm just using 2 feet. Let me just switch this back to the roof outline, and then let me just explode these. Right. So how would I approach this? Straightforward. I'm going to treat this as this is the biggest part of the roof, so I'm going to treat this as its own section. Right. So I need to just check out the distances here. Okay, so this is my longest side. I didn't need to measure that to know that, but this is my longest side. So I'm going to want to have like a ridge in here, right? And my hip rafters running off like that and like that and so on, right? And like that and like that and so on, right? So I have the outline, the overhang, and now I'm going to run my rafters in, my hip rafters in like this. But remember what we said, we're going to treat I'm going to treat this part as its own roof. Okay, so if I'm going to do that, then I need to extend this down like so. I need to extend this across like so. So now I have I'm going to treat this like its own roof right here. Now this looks like a rectangle, so let me see the longest side. So it's right, so the longest side is this way. Okay, so I mean my ridge is going to be in here somewhere, going this direction with the longest side. So let's start with making sure that every wall has its own overhang going around. All right, so this wall, I need an overhang. So I'm going to extend this coming down to there. This wall has its overhang here, but it doesn't have one here. Let me extend this there, right? This wall has its own overhang, and this one has its own overhang right next to it. All right, so I'm going to treat this as its own roof. Okay, actually I need to extend this all the way down. So notice it doesn't line up. That is okay. I'm going to bring it there and extend this across to there. Right, so that's fine. Exactly what it is. We're going to use this corner right there, that edge. Okay, so let's join our hips like so. My hip rafter right there. Use this other one, hip rafter right there. This one, hip rafter again, like so. Hip rafter like so. Alright, and then just trim these up, and I'm going to draw my ridge right there. Okay, so it's like it's kind of like we already have a roof for this section right here. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is kind of get rid of all the lines that we extended like so, for all these overhangs and the walls. All right, I'll get rid of this, get rid of this, get rid of that. So we have these in place, although I remove the lines. Alright, so now we want to treat this part that is sticking out as its own roof. So we're going to put our rafter, hip rafter from the corners, hip rafter from the corner. Alright, and then I'm going to draw this line where these two hips meet. That's where you get your ridge, and the ridge comes up all the way until it meets the hip from this portion of the roof. And what do we say we do? We're going to get rid of this side. Why this side? Because remember we said, imagine you have your ridge at the highest point, your highest ridge, and then you have a hip rafter coming down, and then this hip rafter meets a ridge, so it stops right there. So we're going to get rid of that hip rafter. It stops when it meets that ridge. Alright, if you think of it that way. So that now leaves this entire side over here that slopes this direction. Okay, if rain falls, all of it slopes down, runs off this side, going from left to right. Alright, so this side is finished. We have this piece here. We just need to put in our valley rafter in this corner right there. Let's keep it at 45. Notice it lines up right where the ridge meets the hip and the valley meets them all right there. Okay, so what do we need to do now? I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to treat this piece as its own roof. I'm going to draw my 45-degree lines like so, and then let me just get rid of those. All right, so remember the principle. We are going to treat each part like its own roof. Okay, so we already started this section by bringing up the hip rafters up here, right? So this is like its own section right here, and then you would where they meet, that's where your ridge is going to be. Okay, now I'm just drawing it there for example, but this is not the full length or anything. We don't know where to stop yet. So we treated this section here like its own rectangle, right? Like if we have this, like if it went across, all the way across, and this went all the way across like so, and this went all the way across like so. So there we have our own rectangle right here. Okay, so if you're treating this as its own section, right, that means you would have to draw our hip lines over here. But since this side is already completed, we don't need to worry about doing anything over here, right? We can just worry about this side. So let's treat this, let's look at this side of this rectangle here as its own building, with its own roof. Okay, so if this is a rectangle, that means it would have its own edge running somewhere around here, and then it would have its hip rafters running in from here, also from the other corner that would be somewhere around here. In order to know that, we need to extend our overhang lines. So this overhang line is for this wall, this overhang line is for that, this overhang line is for that wall, so on. This overhang for this wall. We could just extend this across just for the sake of consistency, so we could see the whole, this overhang, that wall, etc. So let's try to draw in these things real quickly. We have the 45-degree line this way, or the other 45-degree line this way, right? So where these two hip lines meet, that's where the ridge is going to be. So we are going to put a ridge right here. And this ridge is going to be meeting up with this hip line running here, right? And if that happens, remember what we said, whenever this ridge meets up with this hip line, we're going to get rid of the rest of this hip line right here. The reason is, as we said, if we think about it, this is your highest ridge, and then there's a hip line from that ridge running down, and as it's running down, it meets a ridge, another ridge board. So right when it meets that ridge board, it stops. It no longer continues to go on past that. So you could trim that out, clean that up. All right, like so. So there we have this section. Over here is complete. This part is complete. It slopes that way. We also need to put in this valley rafter right here, like so. So we could see the building goes up this slope, and it turns, and then it turns, and then it turns again. Right, that's how we're treating it. This side comes down here. So remember, we have a ridge, and then there's this hip rafter coming down, and this hip rafter over here is coming down, but as it's coming down, it meets the ridge of another part of the roof. It meets another ridge. So what do we do when we see another ridge? It stops. This hip rafter stops when it gets to that ridge. So we could get rid of this side. Alright? And basically all we need to do is just clean this up a little bit, and we're almost done. Well, we're essentially done. So let me just get rid of all these lines that we extended in here, like so. There's one line missing. Let's put in this valley rafter right there. Okay, so we have this side that is sloping this way, right? Maybe what I can do is turn off the wall layer. So I can trim out all this, right, and make all of this same line type scale. Right, so here we have I'm going to use a hatch just to show it. So here we have let's use a solid, this slope that slopes from left to right. Then we have this slope, right, of the roof right here, and then we have this slope which water would go this way, right? Then we have this slope which water would go that way. This slope, water would flow that way, right to left. This one sloping that way, this one sloping that way, and this one here sloping this way. This one sloping that way, this one sloping that way. Alright, so basically that is the way I go about creating roofs. We start with the outline, and then we start with the biggest portion. Well, I like to start with the biggest portion. I treat that as my main, roof, as if that is a building by itself, and I draw a simple hip roof on that. And then from that, now I would do all of the different parts that stick out. I would put, my hip rafters running my ridge, and where the ridge meets the hip, where this ridge meets this hip, I would just cut off the excess that I already had running down there. Alright, so that's basically, I hope you learn something from it, and I hope that you would be able to just draw your own, go ahead and draw your own irregular shape house, and see how complex you could get. See how complex you could get, and do and design a roof. design your roof. All right. So try it out, explore the concepts. You will start small, start simple, and then add a few more parts that stick out. And then until you're getting comfortable with it, you're able to see it, and then before long you would be able to bring to draw a roof on any of these type of house shapes. All right, see you guys in the next one.